Paintings then were to look at those cartoons now, they might very well talk about the formal values before they talk about the effect that an explosion or a refrigerator or a golf ball had upon them.
Somebody put some gin in this.
By the end of the 70s, the enfant terrible of the art world had become its establishment figures, with a major exhibition at the Whitney Museum.
Energetic and alive yet after all this time, because all these paintings are really old, getting old.
And another remark.
But Robert Rauschenberg and James Rosenquist were still painting the same kinds of pictures, and Andy Warhol had drifted off into films. Only Roy Lichtenstein had already developed through a number of highly distinctive phases. Though his comic book imagery remained his most popular, he progressed through various stages of abstraction, from vast brushstrokes and even larger paintings of mirrors, into works replete with art historical reference, from still lives to homages to Picasso. The subject of art history has dominated the greater part of his career. He began reworking Picasso in 1964, but he'd admired him all his life. I know he's always been someone you hugely admired to the extent of seeking out his house when you were on draft in front, going to the door, not being able to summon up the courage to knock. Something I completely understand.
I did feel pretty silly, but I probably would have felt sillier had I knocked on the door and Picasso answered, you know. But I'm sure he's the greatest influence in the 20th century, but he was also a big influence on my early work, which unfortunately looks like Picasso or Braque or Klee or whatever, but it's got everybody in it. But I think of him as the central force, since he did so much and changed the nature of painting so much and invented so many images and things. So he's hard to get out of one's head, and you can even look at abstract expressionism as a desperate attempt to rid yourself of Picasso images, because they still creep into most abstract expressionists' work too. And I think everyone's kind of desperately trying to get away from him.
Why? It's interesting. Why?
Well, you don't want to look like someone else, particularly someone so known that you, oh, that looks like a Picasso. Well, great. So I think until I confronted him head on and simply painted a Picasso, that sort of liberated me from that influence. And then it's obvious that it isn't a Picasso. It's a woman with flowered hat or whatever, but you know the source, but it doesn't look as though I was influenced by Picasso. It looks as though I was painting a Picasso and missed by a long shot.
But as soon as this series of paintings went on show, Lichtenstein found himself in the center of controversy again.
It's funny to think of it, but there was a lot of outrage at that time because, of course, by then, Picasso himself, a heretic, was considered a master. And while it was natural for Picasso to pillage art history, it was considered obscene for a younger artist like Roy to pillage Picasso. And there were heated debates at that time about what one could and could not lift.
Picasso himself had turned Manet's Déjeuner sur l'Arbre into a complex modernist work and transformed Velázquez's Family of Philip IV until it was almost unrecognizable. Delacroix and others underwent the same treatment. In this light, Lichtenstein's parodies seem almost tame, and he's returned this year to doing more, working from postcard reproductions. We took him the 2 miles to the Museum of Modern Art to show him the original Picassos, which he'd never seen before.
I like this group very much, this group that he did in the late 20s and early 30s. Maybe they're very adaptable to cartoons, the more or less primary color, the very black and white feeling they have. I just think these are an enormously strong and eccentric group. One of the, I think maybe the group of Picassos I've always admired most.
But while Picasso's work inspires him, Lichtenstein is not setting out to copy him.
I don't really care what the original is. I'm going to straighten all the lines out, and I even like the fact that it's one step removed from, more than one step removed from the Picasso. The recent ones I'm doing, I actually collaged the postcard that I got at the Museum of Modern Art and didn't even draw the Picasso in the drawing. It is very different from the reproduction. In fact, in the reproduction, part of the top, I notice, is cut off, and many of the colors are quite different. I don't care that the colors in my painting are not the colors in this painting. They'll be close enough to give you an idea of what I was alluding to, but they're, none of the colors will be the same, and the way the marks are made are completely different, and the whole feeling of mine will be different.
His interest in Picasso and other past painters makes him all the more aware of his own place in art history. He sees his own techniques and subjects in a continuous line of descent all the way from medieval art.
I guess it went from only portraying God to portraying kings, to portraying noblemen, ordinary people, you know, business people, the Dutch, and to beggars and still lives and landscapes with no people.
And beggars to sort of prostitutes and outcasts at the late of the 19th century.
Yes, and it really just does. That's not the only thing you can see through the history of art. But anyway, the idea of vulgarizing, I think, is just almost part of recent history, where you get it in cubism and collage, particularly where common objects are pasted on along with other things, and things like Picasso's absinthe glass, where it isn't a commercial object, but it's something, say, that Degas wouldn't have done. You see, it's more modern than that, and the use of newspaper as part of collage brings something that you deal with every day. So you get things becoming more vernacular.
Lichtenstein's cartoons are at the end of this art historical chain, but he's repeatedly delved back into recent art history to see what else it can tell him. He uses reproductions from books rather than the actual paintings in museums to provide his source material, and he's borrowed from the work of several artists, including Mondrian, Hokusai, and Van Gogh. Monet's series of paintings of Rouen Cathedral allowed him to see how Impressionism would look if done by machine.
This is an example of Monet anticipating my later work. This is a seriously beautiful painting, and this is the way the same thing might appear in the age of mechanical reproduction. And most of my paintings try to get the effect of having been produced by a machine or some removed process that excludes the human. I tried to get the same, or a sort of effect like that, through the use of a dot screen, to symbolize the way it might be done by a printing press if there were no artist around. The difference is stark. This is a thing of wonderful beauty.